We'll continue with the principles of discovery. And we've covered 7 principles, and we're up to principle number 8. Principle number 8 reads as follows: use the power of your mind to ensure that you are perceiving correctly. Now, correct perception is an important thing while we're living in this world. Now, a lot of metaphysical students talk about we're living in illusion and perception can't be relied on and so on. But while we're in the illusion, we have to perceive what is here with accuracy, or else we will not even be able to communicate with each other. And one of the main things interfering with correct perception is what? What do you think is the main thing? What distorts what we perceive more than anything else?
Well, false ideas, misplaced thinking.
That's all true. I'm looking for a certain word.
How about emotions?
That's it. That's the word I was looking for. Our emotions do. Our emotions
I had
are funny.
ideas.
Yeah. Our emotions are a funny thing because if we have a certain mindset on something, we can perceive one thing, and well, 2 people with different emotional feelings can see the same thing and interpret it entirely differently. Matter of fact, the emotional world is kind of what I call like a mirror image. You look in a mirror, you don't see your real face, you see your reversed face. You know, hold up some print up to a mirror and everything will be reversed. Yet when you see your face in the mirror, you think, well, yeah, that looks true, looks like the true me, but it's really not. It's the reverse you. So it's interesting, and this is the way the emotions are. The emotions go along with your bias, yet it makes you think you're seeing the true reality. When if you follow your emotions, you will reverse many different things. So this is why the mind has to take control. You have to center yourself in the mind, and the mind must dominate the emotions. The mind must say to the emotions, settle down, let's see what the truth really is here, not what you feel it is, but let's see what it is. So the seeker must distance himself from the emotions and obtain the viewpoint of what DK says is the observer, the attitude of the observer. And this is the only way to handle the emotions so they don't distort reality for you. And this is difficult. This is easier said than done. It's easy to say that, but difficult to do that, especially when emotional buttons are pressed. Like you get a vaxxer and an anti-vaxxer in the same room together talking, some buttons are going to be pressed within a short period of time. And it will be difficult for either side to talk dispassionately by just perceiving what is actually true. Same thing, you get somebody that loves Trump and somebody hates Trump in the same room together, buttons will soon be pressed. And so taking the viewpoint of the observer is only done by centering yourself in the mind, letting the mind dominate the emotions. Now, a lot of the New Agers are preaching that we need to be mindless and just go with what we feel. And that's totally the opposite of the advice given by DK and other master teachers. And when you think about it, it's the logical thing to do, is to have the mind dominate. Now that's the higher mind. The mind has two parts to it. One is what we call the brain mind, and the scientists think that's all there is to the mind, is just the brain. The brain produces an interplay that causes consciousness and thinking and everything, but we have a mind that's totally separate from the brain that will go with us after we die. And this is the part of the mind that we want to associate with. If we just go with the brain mind, then it just calculates in black and white, and it makes a lot of mistakes, just like the emotions make a lot of mistakes and see everything upside down. The brain mind sees everything in black and white. So they can even read the words of Jesus and interpret them in a negative way because of just total black and white. Whereas the higher mind can see the read between the lines, and that's what has to happen. So let's take a car accident, for instance. We have two people involved in the accident. One guy maybe is mostly at fault, the other guy is mostly the victim. The guy that's at fault, the way he remembers the accident generally is it really wasn't his fault. Who takes responsibility for being the guy that caused the accident when, you know, there's a little bit of gray area? And so the guy that's the main problem, he will see himself as a victim, and he'll try to remember his perception in such a way that the other guy, the other guy just didn't stop in time or something. It was his fault too, just as much or more than his. And so the same thing in a courtroom. You have two people testifying, two eyewitnesses testifying of an event. They will often testify quite a bit different from each other. Now, why is that? They both saw exactly the same thing, but their testimony is different. Why is that? And that goes back to the emotions. They go by what they felt they saw more than what they actually saw. So one of the keys of discovery of truth is to, when we perceive something, go by what we actually saw rather than what we felt it should be. Because after a perception is over, after something happens, we are tempted by our feelings to alter what actually happened in our favor. So the event is more what we wanted it to be rather than what it was. Now, take two people getting a divorce. The way they remember their experience together will often be quite a bit different than the way it was. And they can look back when they fell in love maybe and think, you know, how could I have possibly fallen in love with that ne'er-do-well person? So anyway, our perceptions are very like moving targets. And so when we perceive something, keep that perception in the memory of the way it actually was, rather than what we feel it should have been. I find it interesting, like with class reunions, when we talk about old times, that people will often remember things a lot different than each other. The longer the time span, goes, the more distorted the memory becomes. Yet, if we could go back and look at an actual film of the occurrence, even if it happened 30 years ago, we would all see the same images come up if we could retrieve a film of the incident. And every once in a blue moon, you can do that. You know, people took films in the old days. And it would be interesting to see an argument settled by bringing up a film of something that actually happened. And even then, the perception is different. Like the killing George Floyd, people actually watched that video and they had different interpretations of it, even though it's there for us to actually see. There's certain things that's beyond dispute. You know, the policeman did have his foot on the guy's neck or whatever and stuff like that. But incidents like that are very emotionally charged, even if you look at the actual film, two people will perceive what is happening differently. And because of attachment to their emotions. Attachment to their emotions makes them, they can see something and not see it. But it's interesting, they did an experiment a while back during a basketball game where the audience was really involved. They sent this guy out on the court in a gorilla suit. And people were so involved with the game that they did not see the guy with the gorilla suit wandering around on the court. Maybe a handful did, but most people didn't even see the guy in the gorilla suit. And so that was an interesting experiment. There's another story about Magellan ships. The Magellan lit on this port where there was a bunch of natives there, and they were fairly primitive. And there was Magellan ships docked out in the sea, and the concept of a ship was so foreign to the consciousness of the natives that they did not see the ships. They could look out in the sea and they would see no ship because it was beyond their consciousness. And so they didn't even react to Magellan showing up. They had no fear or anything because they didn't see anything. So that's, I don't know if that story is true, but whether it's true or not, it illustrates the point. Now the gorilla suit thing was apparently really, we know for sure happened because that was part of an experiment. So, so it's interesting perception. It's true we are in a world of illusion, but to navigate in this world, we have to perceive correctly, make sure we perceive correctly, and deal with that perception. Because if we take our perception and distort it, then we will distort everything else too. That's the beginning of seeing the true reality, is just accept what we perceive the way that it actually happened. Now, Bible believers are good examples of distorted perception. A Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, a Mormon, they all get together in a room and share the same scripture, and their perception of that scripture is totally different. One will say, no, it means this. Another will say, no, it means this, even though to a person that's maybe not religious, say an atheist might read it and he may say, well, it's obvious what this means, because he's not emotionally involved. But because the three really religious ones are emotionally involved, they will interpret it differently. Whereas the atheist could probably come closer to the truth maybe than the three, because he's not emotionally involved. He doesn't care if the Bible is true or not. So he, the atheist in this case may see it more accurately. So what can the seeker do to ensure he has correct perception? There are several things that he can do.
Keep an open mind.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things we're gonna be talking about. Okay, any other ideas?
Listen to Dr. Fauci no matter what.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, listen to your authorities, and how often have your authorities been wrong? Okay, number one, make sure you register correctly the written or spoken words. Okay. And this is something that we don't do, is we often are thinking of something else when an event occurs, and our mind is occupied with a lot of things, so we don't pay enough attention to see what's really going on, or maybe to hear what's being said, or maybe to read what's being written so that you can understand it. So paying attention is important, and also reading between the lines. When you're having a conversation with somebody, sometimes there's, well, the language, no matter what language you're speaking, is imperfect. And you have to get tune in to what the person's intent is sometimes to get what he's actually saying. If you're just black and white about what he's saying, sometimes you won't understand it. Okay. 2, the seeker must assess whether the communication is to be taken literally or not. Okay, sometimes we do speak figuratively somewhat. Sometimes the words aren't there to convey with literalness 100% accuracy. So need to give who's ever communicating the benefit of the doubt that what he's saying may not be completely literally. Or sometimes people may make a joke about something, and people will take it literally. I thought it was funny. Rush Limbaugh, one time he made a joke about his mother having to eat canned dog food, and somebody on the floor of the Senate took that literally. It was a joke he was making. And on the floor of the Senate, one of the people talked about how disgraceful that was. Rush Limbaugh's mother was eating dog food. And Rush really made hay about that. He thought that was really funny that they took him literally when he was just making a joke, and the audience understood that it was a joke, but people didn't like him. thought his mother did eat dog food. But that's just one example. But people, I've done that, found that myself in that situation. I make a joke about something and people take it literally. Most people can catch a joke, but some people are in a very serious mode. Okay, if there's a doubt about what is meant, number 3 here, the seeker should ask questions so he can clearly understand the context. And this will solve a lot of problems. A lot of times, if you're having a conversation and the person hears something that seems a little odd, instead of asking for clarification, he'll just go with the misunderstanding. Whereas maybe saying, now, you said this, did you? And it sounds like you meant this. Is that what you really meant? And if you ask the person that question, he may clarify and say, well, no, let me give you a further explanation. And then maybe the whole misunderstanding can be resolved. So don't shy away from asking questions for clarification, especially if somebody says something that insults you. maybe the guy didn't mean to insult the person at all. And so now when you said this, it sounded like you meant this. Is that what you meant? Did you really think I'm a terrible person? Okay. And he'll say, no, no, I didn't think that at all. Sorry about that. Number 4, do not insist the speaker means something he says he does not mean. And this happens often in arguments. Oftentimes, I know when I've been in an argument with someone, they will say, well, you said this. And I said, well, no, that's not the way I said it. And I didn't mean that. I don't even think that. He says, you must think it because that's what you said. Okay, well, you try to clarify and they will not accept the clarification. So this often happens in arguments, that the person is misunderstood and the other person is so closed that he will not accept a clarification. He wants to believe the other guy is attacking him. It's kind of mysterious how people see it that way. Okay, number 5, have intent to accurately perceive. Now, the average guy can increase his ability to remember names by 50%, they say, if he just pays attention when you hear the name. And I found that to be true. If I'm introduced to somebody and I just think I'll remember the name, I will often forget. But when you're introduced to somebody, if you just think, okay, John Smith, I got to remember that name. And you make a point to perceive it correctly and remember it, you increase your ability to remember that name 50% just by reminding yourself, I want to remember that name. Now, the same thing with perception. In perception, we kind of glide along, but when important things happen in life, make an effort to perceive correctly, because this is part of the problem. Is oftentimes the perception is fuzzy in the memory, so people wind up arguing about what really happened just because they didn't pay that much attention. Same thing in the courtroom. One witness may be somebody that paid a lot of attention. The other witness was kind of just looking out of the corner of his eye, and he's not very reliable, and he says gives quite a bit different account than the other witness that did pay attention. So pay attention is the important thing. Okay, that basically covers this. Any comment on perception and using the power of the mind over the emotions?
Yeah, I had my nose rubbed in this lesson over the last 2 weeks. I had decided I was going to use these standard snap-in hub fill valves that are used on airless inner tube free tires, and I had modified one, but I just cut the fat part off the end of it and shaped the remaining part. And I showed a picture of it to my brother in Florida, and he said, "Why did you leave the black on it?" I said, "Well, because it's a work in progress kind of thing." And he says, "You should take all the black off and then you can mount it right in the tube." And I ended up, at first I said, well, no, I've got my own ideas, but I really didn't. And I didn't want to experiment because I only had one of these tire valves. And then I got to thinking that, hey, I got 100 of these on order. I can afford to mess with this first one I have already. And I ended up making it where it fits right inside of vinyl tubing.
Oh.
And of called my brother back up and said, I'm going to have to give you credit in the invention, man, because we're using your idea on this fill valve.
Wasn't it your brother that invented that paleo diet or whatever it was?
Yeah, that was my brother Ray. My brother Mike lives still in Florida. My brother Ray wrote the book Neanderthal,
Yeah.
which
but
was basically the first. It was the first book in paleo diets.
Yeah. So is he pretty healthy on that diet?
We both weigh what we weighed back in high school. So
Well, yeah. At least you're
One-
staying slim and trim, huh?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Okay, real good, people. We'll go on to principle number 9. Principle number 9 is communicate clearly to avoid distorting the truth. Yeah, if your communication isn't very good, if you aren't careful about your wording, you will often be misunderstood. Now, we watch this in the political world. I mean, both sides, the liberals and conservatives, they watch each other really closely, trying to find problems in their communication so they can exploit it and say this person is a racist or a bigot or a communist or whatever because he said this. And it may be the guy just wasn't clearly expressing himself. Maybe he didn't mean that at all or whatever. So it's a duty of the sincere seeker to do his part in the of being an effective communicator and not being a part of the problem. The seeker must make sure that all the words he speaks or writes is true to the best of his ability. And this is number 1 in this principle, is to be accurate and honest. And it's very difficult to do. If you make a promise, make sure that you fulfill that promise. If you make a statement, make sure the statement is true to the best of your ability. Now, none of us are perfect, so all of us will make false statements at one time or another. But if we do, it should be not on purpose. So everything that we speak to the best of our ability should be true. After all, if you're visited by an angel or God or your higher self, or you get a revelation from a higher source, you take it seriously. And why do you take it seriously? Because you think that if this comes from on high or God or a higher source, it's true. Okay, that's what the person thinks when he gets any impression from the higher realms. Well, this has to be true because it was revealed through my inner spirit and it just feels true, so it must be true. But what if there was a God up there just playing tricks on everybody, thinking, well, I'm gonna screw this guy over. Okay, and then you found out about it and you found out you couldn't trust God, you couldn't trust anybody. Well, it'd make life not even hardly worth living, you would think. Well, if I can't trust my inner self or God or anything higher than myself, I'm kind of screwed. Now, this also applies to us. If we expect higher sources to be true to us, we have to be true to others. Because if we're not true to others, even though you may get an impression from a higher source, if you're not true to others, you will not be able to interpret that with 100% accuracy. So even though you get a higher impression, if you're into deceit, you will deceive yourself and not be able to communicate what you receive from a higher source with accuracy. Okay, so the true prophets and the true teachers are those that are true to themselves. To thine own self be true, and thou cannot be false to any man. And that's an important statement. It's amazing how enlightened old Shakespeare was.
This above all.
Yeah, to thine own self be true. So even the sincerely honest person has difficulty in communicating thoughts effectively. Many arguments result from bad communication more than disagreements. It's interesting that sometimes when two people are having an argument, they don't really disagree, but they just think they disagree because there's bad communication. Like there's all kinds of words that are interpreted a couple of different ways, like spirit or like liberal or conservative. For instance, people that are into conserving the environments are very conservative because they're trying to conserve the environment, yet they're called liberal. So, there's all kinds of confusion with our English language. So it makes, oftentimes when two people are having an argument, they're accepting a definition of words differently than each other. Now, if you have a conversation with somebody that's into a belief system, say a Catholic or Mormon or a Seventh-day Adventist, you have to get into the way that they use their words if you want to communicate with them. One of the problems the Mormons have is oftentimes they will quote Mormon scripture to convince somebody that doesn't believe in the Mormon scripture of something. And that means nothing to the guy. And so it's important that we understand the person's language. Now, I've been writing a book on the Course in Miracles and participating in a couple of Course in Miracles groups. And I find I have to use their vocabulary. If I just use ordinary vocabulary, I'll get really criticized there. I have to use the Course in Miracles vocabulary and thought system to communicate with anyone in that group, because they are really into using the Course in Miracles thought system. So, and that's a way with old politics, religion, any place where you find there's a strong reliance on a thought system, you have to speak the person's language. Sometimes two groups speaking English or the same language will be as far apart as, say, French and English and understanding each other. So, and even people that you're close to, sometimes you will learn that they have a certain interpretation of certain words. And if you want to communicate with them, you have to use their interpretation of the meaning of that particular word. And freedom is an interesting one, because people have all kinds of ideas as to what freedom is. And most people think freedom is just freedom for self and what they think will bring them more freedom rather than freedom as of the whole. So a person with the idea of freedom of the whole will have an entirely different view of the word freedom than the other guy who just thinks of freedom of the one individual self. Okay, any comment on that before we move on there? Then
Yeah,
we can, yeah.
just keep clarifying your terms. It's you know, like in law, you have to know what your terms are and what, you know, square up your language so that there's no mistaking what you're intending to say. I find that a challenge with my wife sometimes.
Yeah, marriage is the ultimate communication challenge because you have such a close relationship that you have to kind of learn to read the other person so that you can communicate effectively. And so then there's communication beyond words. In other words, the person may be saying one thing and you may pick up by extrasensory perception and also maybe clues and the tone of the voice, the expressions on the face, that maybe they're communicating a lot more than they just said. And there are several things the intuitive person can do about producing effective communication. Number one, if the seeker is speaking rather than writing, you can ask questions of the person you're dealing with. So ask questions to make sure that you get it, you're understanding correctly. Number two, if you feel you're not getting across, sometimes you'll be speaking to somebody and you'll feel you're just, they're not understanding you. You can rephrase it. You can take what you've just said and said, well, let me give you an example, or you can tell a story, parable, or just rephrase it in different wording. And then eventually, sometimes you'll just get a sense, yeah, the guy understands it now. And other times you just can't get through it all. Some people are just a lot more difficult than others. Third, he can expand on his ideas. Maybe he has not presented enough of the picture for the understanding. So this is a problem with communication, that sometimes you understand it correctly and you think you just say a couple of sentences about your idea and the other guy's going to understand it, but maybe he doesn't understand it at all. So he needs a bigger explanation. Okay, and sometimes you have to do that. And four, the person can illustrate with analogies, stories, or parables. And this is one of the best ways to communicate, because if you have an idea you're trying to communicate, like Rick keeps trying to communicate his idea of his pixels, and people have a hard time seeing the whole vision. So if Rick were to produce a story about it, or maybe a parable, and then the great part about a parable or a story is it produces images in the mind, and images in the mind are easy to perceive and remember, and this really helps. And the greatest example of teaching by parables is, of course, Jesus. He taught by, it's amazing, his parables were short, but they had so much meat in them. And even non-believers used the parables of Jesus because they were so simplistic and they taught with such impact. So making a little story, say, well, by example, or maybe you can relate an experience in your life or something, a story that you read, but make it short and sweet and to the point. And this will really help your communication. So what you communicate will be accurate. And this is an important thing. Make your communication accurate and make sure that you can also accurately understand the other guy. Okay, any comments on that?
Well, I think a key, if you're having an argument, especially with your spouse, is watch your tone. You know,
Your tone?
your tone. A soft answer turneth away wrath. I notice when I get into an argument with my wife, it escalates and peaks at a high at a high energy level and my tone rises, hers rises, and then we have to back away from it. But if you just pay attention to your tone, it's not, I did not say that. Well, you know, you did too, you know, then you really, your communication is a lot more than just your words. It's how your words are expressed.
Yeah, that's a real good point. And with my wife, what I have to be really careful of is my eyes. If when we were first, you know, together, if she said something I thought was kind of unreasonable, I would roll my eyes, I guess. And she says, I saw that you rolled your eyes. And so I have learned over the years that when she says something that I don't agree with, just keep my eyes steady as I can. Because that really annoys her if I roll my eyes. So it's amazing what this is what you have to do. You have to learn what antagonizes the other person in communications. Your tone, like Curtis mentioned, is a really big one, and that affects everybody. Your facial expression, rolling your eyes or looking like you're disbelieving, or you got to be careful of everything in your communications. And so
Avoid,
yeah, go ahead.
avoid sarcasm. You know, it's
Yeah,
that,
sarcasm.
that my wife gets
In a
really, you
close
know,
relationship, yeah, in a close relationship, mates do not like sarcasm.
oh boy, I can't believe it. Now what?
Well, even in
Sure.
groups, it's interesting in the Facebook groups that I've played around with. Yeah, people don't like sarcasm there. Some people get highly offended, and it's amazing how easily some people get offended. Now, the Course in Miracles group is an interesting one because Course in Miracles teaches you to love everybody no matter what. And so even when people get irritated there, they still kind of act like, well, I still love you though. So it's a kind of funny group to watch. But so anyway, yeah, good points, everybody. Any other comments or questions on this before we wrap it up?
It just
Yeah.
occurred. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, JJ thinks that she doesn't know he's rolling his eyes. She knows, she knows.
So she sees me sometime rolling my eyes when I'm not rolling my eyes.
Yeah, every,
I think she sees me in the deep inside. I may be actually rolling my eyes, but my eyes, I think she reads my mind sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, she's trying to make eye contact with you, which is another essential ingredient to communication, is to actually look a person in the eyes when you're talking to them. And then if you roll them, oh boy, well, that's a total miss.
You ever get that complaint about you rolling your eyes, Curtis?
No, I don't roll my eyes too much. Oh boy.
You're
What
wise.
next?
Yeah, you've got a problem solved right there if you don't do that. Then that's good.
But body
Maintain
language,
eye contact.
body language is also a very important part of communication. And, rolling your eyes, facial expressions, movements. You can always tell when if a person's telling the truth or not.
Yeah, body language. There's books, entire books, and people that specialize in that, and they can tell a lot by body language. Everything means something. Okay, the next principle is that we'll just talk about next lesson is about being open-minded. I think Rick or somebody mentioned that, and that's what we'll start off with next time, which is kind of an interesting one. So any comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I was going to bring up that while we were talking about this today, it reminded me of when the Holy Spirit descended on the apostles, and after that they went forward and taught in many different languages. I think what they really meant by that phrase was that they had open minds and they could say things in the way that people understood them, because pretty much everybody spoke either Greek or Latin back then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a good point. There's probably a lot of scriptures that are interpreted symbolically, that we can interpret symbolically with more accuracy. Okay, my friends, great to have you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday at 2 p.m. all being well. And
Stay
you-
open.
And everybody be well. Stay away from that nasty virus.
Thank you. Yeah.